Hello, all my fellow renegades out there. Welcome back. We have some exciting announcements for you before we get started today. I'm so excited to talk to my guest. I've played so many of their games and I'm really excited, but we'll get to that in a second. Before we jump in, just a couple quick updates for you. So we do have the Altered Carbon RPG now available for pre-order, so you can check that out. Check that out with your friendly local game store or with us online at the Renegade Game Studios web store. And we also have the Duel of Wands Kids on Brooms card game, which is playable with either your Kids on Brooms RPG, or you can actually play it separately as well. But if you play it in game, you can actually use it to resolve conflicts, which I think is super cool. That is a 2-player standalone game, and it is a totally magic experience. You can pre-order that now online or at your friendly local game store. And we also have Hadrian's Wall, which we announced on our last show, which is available for pre-order, which you got to check out. Honestly, the last episode, I was like, man, I need this game in my life. It's such a crunchy sort of draw and write, that kind of mechanic. So if you're a fan of roll and writes or draw and writes, definitely check this out. Just a quick reminder about our streaming schedule. We are keeping it more phenomenal on Mondays. Wednesday is our Vampire Wednesdays, and we also have the Renegade Society radio show every Friday. And on Thursdays, we're going to have a new thing coming your way where we are basically going to be doing a random roll with guests from the industry where we play games with them online and just chat. Super fun. Before we jump into this, we're going to also be giving away a copy of, and I feel like this will give our guest away, Warp's Edge today. And the code word will be given away later in chat. And you can keep an eye on the chat for a link, which Desiree will be putting in there for you. And obviously, our guest, I'm the host. I think you already know who it's going to be. It is Scott Almes. Hello.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
And a quick reminder to everybody, if you have any questions for Scott, you can just plug those in chat. You can plug them in chat now and we'll get to them later, or just as they come up for you. Scott, it's amazing to have you here. I've played so many of your games, and I don't think I've ever played a game that you've designed and not fallen in love with it. So yeah, you're crushing it, and in so many different genres as well, I feel. But tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and where we can find you online.
Yeah, of course. So name's Scott Almes. I'm a freelance game designer, do a bunch of different games, most known for Warp's Edge and Tiny Epic. I'll plug both those right at the top of here. As far as where to find me, I haunt Twitter like so many people. Scott_Almes is a great place to find me. And I'm also on Board Game Geek like so many of us, where I'm always answering rules questions, finding out what games I want to buy and things like that. So it's a great place to find me as well.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like we're all on Board Game Geek. It's like the place to be when it comes to being in the know on stuff. And it's definitely the place I actually first go to whenever I'm like, I am confused a little bit about these rules. I'm always actually, and then I also do go to Twitter, oddly enough, because I will usually just tweet designers and be like, hi, help. The best thing is that I don't think I've ever tweeted a designer a question about a game and they haven't responded to me. A designer that I don't know personally. When I know them personally, I just call them and I'm like, hey, I'm playing this game and I have a question. And they're like, don't stop calling me for rules, Amanda. But yeah, it's fine. So that's really awesome. All of the games. Yeah, you've designed a lot of Tiny Epic games, by the way. And there's Pirates is coming out this year. Is that out yet?
It's almost out. So it just got on the boat. So it's sailing our way from the manufacturer. If we really kick things off with a really good sense of humor that I have. But yeah, so I actually just got my one of the first manufacturing copies in the mail and was playing with all the bits, and the ships turned out just amazing. We had these really cool skull dice that you were able to add on. So
nice.
Actually did for these times a solo run through just with a production copy finally, and so I'm very excited for that to get out. It was our biggest Tiny Epic Kickstarter yet, and I'm just extremely excited to see it get in everyone's hands.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I love Pirates, and I mean, I don't know what it is about Pirates and board games, but for some reason, those tend to be two themes that we're all just super psyched about. I don't know what that means. I guess all board gamers really love pirates. I don't know, but it's not a bad thing, I don't think.
Yeah, and there's so many pirate, and they're always like, oh, there's no room for another pirate game. And then one comes out and you're like, you know what? I could use another pirate game.
Use
I
one
could.
more on the pirate
Yeah.
shelf. Yeah. Yeah. No, and I definitely have like one of my favorite things to do, anyways, is like collect any games that are like sort of sea themed. So, like, I have like ocean games and pirate games. Then I kind of have like a little area where I just like keep all of those things. So, for me, it's like anytime there's a new one and people are like, is there more room for this? I'm like, I'm just happy there's a new one and I can add it to my collection. But yeah, that's awesome. So, when it comes to designing games as well, how did that start out? Like, how did you get into the board game industry?
Yeah, so let's see. I've been, I guess, a quote unquote professional designer for about 10 years now. So growing up, definitely played tons of board games and cards games with my family, like a lot of the traditional games, Monopoly, Clue, a lot of good card games as well, a lot of euchre, things like that. In high school, played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons led to playing Munchkin, which led to playing Settlers Catan, Ticket to Ride, that normal arc that a lot of people hit.
Yeah.
And about when I was in college, my area of study is mechanical engineering, focusing on product design. And as doing all those studies, I also was just really getting into games and kind of challenged myself, be like, well, somebody has to make these, right? So
Yeah.
I cold called a fair amount of publishers and pitched them really, really, really terrible designs, and eventually got good enough that we got merchandise signed with Tasty Minstrel Games. Was my first one, and that was in 2010, I think it was.
Nice.
So that
Yeah.
was the first one I got signed with them. Kings of Ernstein was right at the same time too, with the same publisher, and I was fortunate to get those in, because those helped me just kind of get everything. Getting your first game is definitely the hardest.
Yeah.
It is really funny to look back on those first ones, because Kings of Ernstein was one of the earlier games on Kickstarter, and I think it raised like $45,000, and at the time it was the like 8th largest Kickstarter like in the board game
Yeah.
industry, and that was like, obviously we're now like Exploding Kittens,
Yeah.
$8 million and things like
Yeah,
that. So
right.
that's like
We've
but
come a long way for sure.
yeah, so that was kind of the first two that really got me into the industry. And then had a couple other ones published, but the big kind of launch was definitely the Tiny Epic
Yeah.
Kingdoms on that, that I published with Gameland Games, and very fortunate that we've been able to continue to grow the series since then. I was right at the height of like the micro game phase, and we just seemed to hit the market at the right time. We did a little bit of an odd thing at the time to release like a free print and play, which was really not common at the time, and we were told by all of our industry friends that that was the dumbest thing we could possibly do.
Mhm.
But it ended up working.
Yeah,
So
no, I think it's great because it just makes it more accessible. And I don't know, it's funny because people say that, but then there are so many games. Like, for example, like you have the creators of Cards Against Humanity had the print and play, and they also did other games that were print and play. That, like, I have games, like I have print and play games that I don't think anyone's even ever heard of, but that I break out and people are like, what is this? And it's like so good. And I personally think it's great because it just gets people to know who you are. And then from there, once you have that, it's like you have a platform now that you can launch from, which is powerful. What was the first one, the first Tiny Epic Gameland games? Remind me of which one that was, because I feel like,
yeah, Tiny
yeah, you
Epic
go ahead.
Kingdoms was the first one.
Kingdoms. Okay. I think the first one that I played was it was the one in space. Is it Tiny Epic Galaxy? Is that?
Yeah, Tiny Epic
Yeah,
Galaxies.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
That was the first one that I played, and I am personally a huge micro gamer. Like, I also love everything by Oink Games and stuff like that. So for me, all these tiny games, like I'm like, ooh, I love this. Like a game I can play in 20 minutes or so, or like an hour or less, and also just like have so many of them on my shelf. And also they all look so good together. That's the thing that I like about micro games. Yeah, the design. And it's also interesting that you mentioned, you've been designing games since 2010, you said. That was your first one. So it's crazy to me because you've only been, like, now we're in 2021, so it's been like 11 years or thereabouts. And it's so crazy to me because every time I look back at everything you've designed, I'm always surprised when I get to like the end of it, because I'm just like, oh, I feel like there should be more, because your designs are so developed, and so they feel very mature for like someone that I think is relatively new to game design within like the last 10 years. When it comes to your history or your sort of background as a mechanical engineer, do you think that that kind of also plays into it? Especially because like, is that mathy at all? Or I feel like there's a lot of math in your games. Is there math in your games?
Yeah. I like to say that there's an Excel sheet behind every game, no matter which one it is.
Yeah.
That's one of the few like places I start is like some graph paper and an Excel sheet, because it's just a little bit of my background. But I definitely think the engineering background helped me with my design process, because I've always treated any of the games very like traditional, as if you would design like any product. And that means that if it's not showing a lot of promise early, I do things like just cut it out and shelve it and like don't care about it. So I rarely find myself in a position where I'm trying to revive a game that I still might really like, but is just not showing any promise.
Yeah.
And then also really try to rely on like in engineering, like we're really big on like design thinking and engineering thinking, and like always trying to show like what the data shows and not just what your feelings are, because it's so easy to get really cool, like really wrapped up in a cool technology that might not work for your situation. So I really try to rely on like, okay, what's the actual playtest results show? Like if I did not design this, if I was only looking at the feedback from what these people are saying, like, is this good enough to move forward? Not saying there hasn't been some passion projects that I've continued to push forward and fought for a while, but I try to be disciplined at least as best I can.
Yeah, so you try to strip away like a little bit of the emotion of like, this is my game and my baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's smart though. And I feel like it definitely shows in your designs, because I feel like the designs are very, I guess just very clean. And like a lot of the games that I've played just click so well with a lot of the mechanics and the things that are happening. So it's interesting, especially because I feel like you design so many, like I feel like the sky is the limit for you when it comes to what you could be designing. Like I would believe someone could like throw me any kind of game, like a storytelling game, a dexterity game, a drafting game, a press your luck game. And if they were like, these are all designed by Scott Almes, I'd be like, yeah, I believe this. I believe we can do all of these things. Do you have like a favorite part of the design process when it comes to sort of like deciding, I guess, like which way you want to go, or like what you're making, or your approach to it? Just because I feel like everything is so open for you. Like, where does that start? And I guess, yeah, what's your favorite part of it?
Yeah, it's whenever I approach a new design, I'm always trying to like challenge myself in some way. So like the Tiny Epic series we've done, I think Pirates will be our 13th box if I'm including base games and expansion. So we're always asking ourselves like, what's something we haven't tried yet? What's something we can surprise people by getting in a box that small? So like with Pirates, those like really detailed plastic miniature ships for a super small box game, we're like, that's gonna surprise people for what they can get in there. Or the item meeples in Quest, when you actually got to like put in little swords and stuff, like that's gonna surprise people. So
I played Defenders, and we have the little item meeples, and I was like, oh my gosh, the amazing part when you like get an item and you're like, well, I gotta like stick this in my little guy, or when you put wings on it. It's so exciting. I had to take pictures. Like every time I've played, I've been like, wait, I have to take a picture of like our cool little like meeples, because they're so awesome.
So like that's like, we're always trying to like get that, like what surprising like component do you get in there? Because I like to think that my gameplay is going to hopefully keep it coming back to the table, but I love to have that, like whenever you open up the box and you have this a super cool component or something like that right in there. But some other games, it might be just from like a childhood passion that I want to, like for example, my game The Great Dinosaur Rush. Elementary school me was convinced that I was going to be a paleontologist. That did not shake out the way I wanted it to, but have still had a lifelong love of dinosaurs, and just even like the history of like paleontology and things like that. So that was a game where I was able just to express some of that kind of just lifelong interest in a game. So approaching it like very theme first, I want to do something cool about dinosaurs that's not just like a dinosaur fighting game, but is like actually about the history of paleontology and some of the interesting time periods. So like I did like tons of research, even just that like almost none of it got into the game, but some of it did.
I'm sure it was still fun to research since you're
Oh
interested
yeah.
in dinosaurs, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who isn't interested in dinosaurs?
Yeah.
That's another theme I feel like in board games, that like, can you ever have too many dinosaur games? Probably
No.
not. Probably
No.
not.
No. And it was an excuse to like read up on that kind of stuff for a while, because I'm like, oh no, I'm doing it for research for a board game. That's
Yeah.
why I got all these books. So
That's so great. Is that game about, when it comes to the theme, is it about the idea of like the competition between sort of paleontology and like discovering the dinosaurs? What's the rush element?
yeah, it takes place. Yeah, so the Great Dinosaur Rush
Yeah.
is also called the Bone
The Bone
Wars.
Wars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, where
About the Bone Wars.
yeah, where the two main paleontologists were just really nasty to one another, trying to be the one who discovered the most
Yeah.
things, including like sabotaging each other's dig sites or finding bones and then dynamiting the whole thing to make sure that whenever their rival got there, there was nothing left. Um, Tons of things were misidentified as they did, because they were just doing it
because
so
they kept
quickly.
being like, you're also, they would like be like, you're wrong, no, you're wrong, and they would just be like, this actually goes here, this goes down here, and it's like all of these things are actually wrong. But
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I love that you kept trying to move it around.
Yeah, because that was the start of the whole Brachiosaurus Brontosaurus that people are still
Yeah.
trying to sort out. Changes
Yeah.
every couple years, whether it exists or not.
The best thing now is that people, I feel like when we were growing up, we had this idea of like what dinosaurs look like. And now being in like, 2020 and 2021, it's like actually everything you learned when you were a kid is wrong. And you're like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
This dinosaur actually doesn't even exist. And these parts were actually part of 3 other dinosaurs. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, they
That's
have
cool.
feathers now. They might be colorful. Who knows? I don't
Who
know.
knows what's happening? That's so great. So I assume then it's like you're competing to try to like get the most dinosaurs.
Yeah, so you get to compete over like getting bones, and then actually as a creative element where you get to design
Like
your
assemble
own.
them.
Yeah, and
Yes.
it's actually very freeform, but has a very structured scoring component. So it kind of brings in the fun of like a Pictionary or like a fake artist almost, where you get to like create a really cool looking dinosaur,
Yeah.
but it has like a very stringent scoring mechanic that you actually do so for a reason. So you get to be really creative, but it's
Okay.
not just like
Just
vote
creative.
on the cool one or thing. Like
Yeah.
it has a very like structured.
It has an
scoring
actually like,
method.
if you have these things here, then you get this many points and this and
Exactly.
that. Yeah, that's awesome. And that's also cool because it does give you that creative element. Because for me, I was just about to ask if I get to like build dinosaurs, because I feel like that's what we all want to do. And we're like, oh, it'd be cool to be a paleontologist, because what we want to do is we want to like dig up the bones and then be like, let's try to put this jigsaw puzzle together.
Oh yeah.
Especially with what people used to do then, which I feel like was literally just pull bones out and be like, what could fit maybe?
Yeah.
It's awesome. And when it comes to sort of do you have like a favorite kind of game to design, since you've sort of done all of these things and worked with so many different mechanics? Or is it like always whatever the newest thing is that you feel like you're most excited about?
Yeah. That is a because there's obviously I enjoyed the new one. Like that
Yeah.
one is so much on the one on my mind, especially if it's related to a personal theme, or like one that comes from just something like I enjoy. Like I enjoy like whiskey and like bourbon and stuff like that, and I just designed a game and signed a game related to the industry for that. That was very fun.
That's so awesome.
And
That's so exciting.
yeah, like I said, like the dinosaur one, like that was a very just fun personal theme for it. So those ones have a little bit of extra joy for them.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's something special about everything, because I actually do not do like game design full time, so everything has to have a really spark for it to me even design it. So
Okay. Do you still work in mechanical engineering? Is that like your main hustle?
it's been a little bit different than traditional engineering. So I work in innovation labs. So we do
okay.
integrating like new technologies into product lines.
Oh, cool.
Things like virtual reality, like machine learning, like things like that.
That sounds really cool. Basically, you're like paving the way for the future.
Yeah,
like, how can we use all of these cool things?
Yeah, we
That's
get to
awesome.
come up with really cool early prototypes and then hand it off to somebody else to scale it all the way up. So
Oh, that's awesome. And so like for you, then a lot of the things that you enjoy the most are when you get like a cool theme that you can like kind of bring to life with the design. So like something that you're like, oh, I love this thing. Someone's like so excited to bring it to life.
Oh yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's definitely a special joy for the
Yeah.
game design stuff. So I mean, each one definitely has its own challenges to it for the
Mhm.
different audiences, but yeah, almost everything I need to have some kind of passion around it to, I mean, spend my free time doing it. So
Yeah, that's fair. Is there like a particular type of mechanic that you find that you always want to come back to, or do you usually prefer just to try like new mechanics?
I'm challenging myself to try new mechanics because I would love just to put push your luck into everything because that's my favorite mechanic. I just love push your luck.
Yeah,
um, but I can't have only push your luck games.
that's fair.
So, because one thing, like with the Tiny Epic line, we definitely challenged ourselves to try to have a new mechanic in every one. Like with Pirates, we were using like the rondelle system, which we had never done before.
Ooh.
And Quest had that's the one I got to push your luck in a little bit in Galaxies too. But
Yeah.
um,
I was going to say, I feel like you can, the cool thing about press your luck is that you can kind of put that mechanic in everything because there's going to be elements, because there's always elements in board games of risk management, right? Like you're always kind of thinking, oh, well, if I do this, because anytime you make a choice in a game, it's like, if I choose this, I'm actively not choosing that.
yeah,
So we'll have to see how it pans out. But yeah, I could definitely see in Warp's Edge how there would be press your luck. And I can definitely see in pretty much every game I think I've played, other than maybe Starfall, I don't think there was a lot of press your luck in that. Oh, maybe a bit. Actually, there are in different elements of depending on what
yeah.
you want to get into.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah,
that.
almost
Yeah.
has like a little bit of because you can start to collect something, but it can get too much and break your scoring. It has a little bit of brinkmanship for how much you want to put things, how low you
Yeah.
want to bid something that you might get it, and yeah,
Yeah, there's a little, that's like a little bit of like the risk management in your bidding and in what you decide to like set, collect, and like get into. Yeah, because it definitely, you don't, and also you don't know like sort of what's going to come up when, and there's a lot of things in that. So that's true. But that's really cool. I feel like I'm also a big press your luck fan. So for me, I I feel that. I love press your luck in all my games and dice. Anything that has dice. I mean, who doesn't like a nice pair of dice, you know? And so press your luck actually tends to be a very, like, then we're going back to risk management again. So that is very mathematical. And how important do you feel math is in game design for you or for like anyone?
yeah. I think it's pretty important, especially whenever you include things like dice mechanics in there to really like um, make sure things are fair and balanced as much as you can. Or card games, I feel like whenever I design card games, like I feel like there's just a surprising amount of math to make sure that like if you're dealing out random hands, people are still going to get like a reasonable chance to win. If there's not like a drafting mechanic or some other way to balance that out. Or even just that there's enough resources in there for like people
Yeah.
so I'm always surprised by how much math there is in just a card game to get it out.
Yeah. I feel like that's definitely, I mean, I feel like it's one of those things that you don't realize. And then when you are looking at the design of like a card game, you're like, oh yeah, because you'd have to figure out this number, but then you also have to make sure that this later works. So it's like the starting, the later, all of these things. And then like how many cards do we have in total? Are we adding cards? Are we ever taking cards out to like balance that? And also I feel like a lot of the stuff that I've played of yours where there are cards has been very easy but specific to set up.
Mhm.
So like there's a lot of, so I feel like also because I think the other interesting thing is that there are quite a few of the tiny epic games that really do allow for like different numbers of players to come in
Mhm.
and out and for everything to still work really nice. Like I've played games with fewer people and then with more people, and every time I've played it, it's still been like an enjoyable experience, which I think is hard to do because you have to like then rebalance everything with like each number of players, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
And actually, one of the most challenging mathematic games I've done is actually Warp's Edge because of keeping track of like the number of tokens that could potentially be in the game versus how many can be pulled out of per time, and like through the different phases of the game. Like that was actually probably one of the hardest ones. I do not know how like people who have done many different token builders, deck builders, like they probably have a better way to math it out than I did. I felt like I was doing a lot of back of the envelope and things like that. So a lot of trial and error to get there.
Yeah, I feel like with games where you have like bags and building with the bag, it's definitely a lot. And it's also my favorite thing whenever I play a game that has like bag building is like the element of if you ever forget when you're like setting something up and it's like so many pieces have to go in the bag and like some things have to come out. I'm always the person, I need other people to remind me because I will forget sometimes is like what has to go in here and what has to come out. And so I've definitely played games where I've like totally ruined the game by not setting up the bag properly. And then we just like, if it's a cooperative game, especially like I've lost really badly and people are like, wow, this was like soul crushing. And I'm like, why was this so, oh, it's because I messed up the setup. And people are like, oh, because bags can be deadly if you don't either math it or like me just set it up properly and listen to the rules that you're given. But the fact that you brought up Warp's Edge is perfect because we are going to give you the code word now, friends that are watching us out in the ether, out in the world, wherever you be, whatever time it is where you are. And the code word for our giveaway today for Warp's Edge is mothership, because that's what you're trying to defeat in the game. It makes sense. Desiree is going to put the link in the chat for you guys so you can click in there and enter mothership to enter into that giveaway. And I hope you win because this game is so awesome. And I really think this is the perfect time to be playing some Warp's Edge in your life. Go on a little space adventure by yourself and just feel great and exciting. So coming back as well to Tiny Epic games, which there are so many of. Do you have a favorite that you've designed? And do you have a favorite that you've played of the ones you've designed?
Yeah, this is a good one. So I have a soft spot for Tiny Epic Quest with the first one we did the item meeples for, and because it has that fun push your luck on it. It evokes a lot of those like kind of classic like Super Nintendo RPGs, like very much a little bit of Zelda feel and things like that. So that's one that I definitely, it has just a big fun adventure feel to it. I've definitely probably played the most Galaxies because that is the best reviewed one I think at the moment, and just seems to be the biggest runner and kind of the fan favorite for it. When I think about design, my favorite one to design, Galaxies was the one that I ironically thought was the worst one I designed, because at that point I had Kingdoms really took off and just really surprised us. Defenders was a modification of a game I had already been designing. So Dynamic Galaxies was the first one I designed like from the ground up to be the next Tiny Epic. And I did not think I was going to be successful in that. I was like, how do you design like something else in the series that makes sense? How do I like, and I probably beat myself up enough that it actually ended up just being really good because that seems to be how it's selling and how the reviews came out. So it was probably good. I was super harsh on myself as I was designing it. But that's the one I was like nervous as all heck, because I was like, I'm gonna ruin this great thing we have going. You know, we had really fun with 2, and I'm gonna ruin it on the 3rd one, and it's gonna be awful.
Well, and now you're on 13, so nothing is ruined and everything is miraculous. And I love that it's like the one that you were the harshest on yourself on, and it's like the most well-reviewed of them all. Yeah, it was actually one of my friends showed it to me and was like, I think you're gonna love this, because knew I was into micro games. And I remember we didn't even get to finish it. Like we kind of just set it up and like just started. And it was when I worked an event where I basically was a board game teacher, but it was always super chill. Like we had a library of games at this place. People didn't usually need our help. So in between, we would just like sit and play games. And then sometimes people would actually come over and be like, what are you playing? And it would just be stuff we brought. Like it wouldn't even be part of our library. And we'd be like, if you want to like check it out, you can even play with us or like join in. So it was super casual, super fun. And we just set it up and we played like a few turns. And then it was time for us to like pack up and go, because it was like right near the end of the night. So we didn't end up finishing it. I think we got about halfway through. It was only like a few minutes of playing. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this was so good though. I really want to finish it. So we came back to it like after, and then we didn't end up finishing it because my friend had to like leave. And the next time he came, he had it with him. And I was just like, do you have that Tiny Epic, the game we played? And he was like, yeah, Tiny Epic Galaxies. I was like, can we play that like right now? Because I'm like itching to like, I really want to finish it because it was so good. Yeah. And it definitely, and then I remember I met Gamelin at another con, I think when I was in Arizona. And I just remember they were like, oh, we have all these. And I'm like, oh, Tiny Epic games. It's like, I love Galaxies. And I was just like obsessed with everything they had. And every time I've seen them, there's always something new and exciting that you guys have to show off, which is amazing. So that's great. Yeah, and I feel like Quest definitely with the item meeples. The item meeples, it's so interesting. You mentioned earlier the idea of having a cool component, but really hoping that like the gameplay is what keeps people. But I feel like the cool component is really a great hook for people. So that's really brilliant the way you guys do that, because it's a good way to get people excited who don't know Tiny Epic yet. Yeah. Also, if you don't know Tiny Epic and you're watching this, you should play some Tiny Epic games because they're all great.
Yeah. And I as you mentioned, like I feel like as a designer, like I can do like as much as I can to make the game like I feel like the art is in the components is definitely going to be what gets someone to play it initially, and then hopefully what I will do will get that person to tell other people about the game.
Yeah. So. I mean, I definitely think that worked because that is usually the way my friend Scott, who showed it to me, the way he works is like the mechanics are really like, once he plays something, he's just like, ooh, yeah, I need this. And then he will show it to everyone if he loves it. So, and then I do the same thing. And that is how games explode, I think, in our industry. So yeah, you're doing it right. That's really cool. I feel like when it comes to Pirates, is there something that you're super excited about for that one?
Other than I'm really proud with how the solo game turned out. Like it has a lot of variability where you get to just the way you flip over like the player mats to basically build a custom enemy to face against every time, and they always have like an attribute and a name, and it's the way they combo out. There's just, I think in the base game there's maybe 16 different ones that you can face against, and each one has like its own challenge and personality. So I thought that was a really cool one. I was able to make work, especially, in this time when so many people are getting into solo gaming.
Yeah, so. It's a good time to be a solo gamer, definitely, for sure. And when it comes to solo games, so like that is a solo element. We have Warp's Edge, which is a solo game. Are there some other games that you've had that have solo play options, or other solo games that you've done? Am I missing anything?
Yeah. So for all the Tiny Epics, we have done solo games. And then, of course, Warp's Edge is one of the biggest solo-only games I have out, of course.
Yeah.
I've been doing the Simply Solo series with Button Shy Games. So we did Food Chain Island and then The Ugly Griffin Inn. So these little 18-card wallet solo games that you could have. And a fair amount of my recent games have had solo games because it's been very much on Kickstarter nowadays. There's an expectation that you're going to have a solo version nowadays. So it's actually, I would consider it pretty hard to kickstart something without a solo version. So I feel like you almost have to have a reason why you don't have one.
Interesting. That's very interesting. I haven't noticed that. I'm gonna keep an eye out for that. But I love that trend because I do want to, I just want more options. I mean, I think we always want more options for our games to a ridiculous level as gamers, where we're like, yeah, could it play like just me? But then could it play like 12 people? People are like, possible, but maybe I'll try. But I love that. I do think with most games, there is a way that you could modify a game to make it solo or to make like some kind of version of it. And yeah, definitely today, considering you don't know how many people you're going to get to be around, it makes a lot of sense. Do you, when it comes to your approach to sort of designing these solo variants, or, even with Warp's Edge, which is just solo, what do you think makes a solo game, or like breaks a solo game? And what do you think sort of both separates it from the experience of like gaming with my friends, and both is like kind of the same as gaming with my friends in a weird way?
Yeah. So for me, I always do like a solo game that feels like you're playing against a particular opponent, if that's possible. So like I mentioned in Pirates, where you kind of custom make an enemy pirate to go up against. That's something that I find fun. It's not appropriate for every game. Tiny Epic Quest has like a more of a beat your score mechanic on it, but I love if I'm able to strive against like beating a particular component, because it actually does feel like you're facing off against something.
Yeah, it's really cool too when you can modify that component. Like that's exciting for me in Pirates, that I can change my enemy each time.
Yeah. So like a game like Warp's Edge, when I solo focused, was not going to have any chance of having it be multiplayer. This is a solo only game. Like I knew I wanted to make it feel like you were facing off against something. So in this case, facing off a mothership, as we mentioned earlier. In like, well, also a whole horde of enemies besides that, but it felt like you were kind of going against this one main goal as you were playing the game. So that's something I like to see in solo games whenever I play. Well, one of the challenges is that some tricks you can use, like players are actually a great balancing element for games. Like if someone's like starting to run away, there might be some way another player can hold them back or take resources from them. Not the case in every kind of like really European style game, but like a lot of games, there's ways for players to inhibit one another, compete against head to head. So like,
yeah, in North America, I feel like that's very much our thing. We like to mess with each other.
For sure. And that's like honestly a little bit of a crutch for us designers, is that like just even having players at the table, they're going to help you balance out your game even if you didn't do your math right. But in the solo game, you don't have like there's no one else there. It's your math, it's your design. Like if it feels I feel like it's so much harder to get that, does this game feel fair, which is one of the like the cardinal sins you can do for any game, is having a game feel unfair to the player, like they didn't have a chance. So
yeah, I think that's it's interesting that you say that. It's kind of like solo games are like the most naked you can be as a game designer. It's like, this is just me, here I am. And hopefully my design is like good.
Oh yeah.
So interesting. I've never thought about it that way. I'm gonna think about that every time I really love a solo experience. I'm gonna be like, this person, they're good. I'm gonna keep an eye on them.
Yeah, it's just like, as you said, I was like, it's the pure design. Like that's all there is at the table. You're not, even a game that you might not enjoy, you're playing with your best friends, you might like still have a great time.
Totally. And that's the weird thing about, like, it's so interesting with games, because I also know people that have played games that will never play them again. Who've played them once because they had like a terrible experience. And it's usually not to do with the actual game. It's to do with someone else's interpretation of the game that was at the table with them that like wouldn't let something go, or like people that they played with and their dynamics. So it's so funny when people play a game and then I want to play something and someone's like, oh, I will never play that. I always have to be like, was it the game though? Or was it like, who did you play it with?
Yeah.
Some of that experience. Because when you're playing a solo game, it's just you and the game. So if you don't like it, it probably has to do with more the game than anyone that was at the table with you. Yes. I guess unless you sit at a game and you like, I really don't like myself. So it's not an experience. Hopefully no one out there is feeling that terrible about themselves, though. I hope. That's so when it comes to Warp's Edge as well, tell me a little bit more about that game and sort of like where the inspiration came with, or sort of how that game progressed, because it is also like, I think it's one of the top rated games. When I was looking you up on Board Game Geek, it's like right near the top, and it's still so like fresh.
Yeah, that's something cool. I've been so excited by like the reception on this one, because it's the reviews have been just really kind and like really great. So I'm glad people have been enjoying it, especially this really rough year. So being able to have like a cool solo game that people are really appreciating is it was
fantastic. Like a really weirdly convenient time for us to feel like, here's Warp's Edge. It's like perfect.
Yeah, because I think we kickstarted it in January or February maybe.
Yeah, it was like right before like everything happened, and then I was like, wow, that's convenient that we just did a solo game. That's good.
But yeah, so like a lot of the thematic so I know I wanted to do something with bag building, because I've not done bag building before, and I think the challenge of really trying to has that little bit of push your luck where you're which I said I like to slip into every game where you're, trying to get the right tokens in there. And it's also just a really cool puzzle of like trying to make sure like your collection of tokens is balanced right to get through all the challenges ahead. And I wanted to trying to think of a really cool thematic hook for a reason why you would keep going back to this bag and like kind of I wanted to be able to like go through the whole bag several times going through. And the idea of like the Groundhog's Day and like science fiction really started to come out to me a lot. Has a little bit of inspiration from The Edge of Tomorrow, which is an awesome sci-fi movie. And
Love Edge of Tomorrow.
yeah, obviously a little bit of Star Wars as well, as you're like a lone star fighter out there facing against these hordes of ships and things like that. So
For sure.
a lot of inspiration from some of those. I guess Edge of Tomorrow is probably a little bit newer, but like a lot of those still classic sci-fi movies.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can call Edge of Tomorrow classic now because I just feel like it's become such a sci-fi staple. Like if you love sci-fi, you probably know Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
And if you don't, and then you watch it, you're going to be like, oh, this is like now going to be on constant recall in my brain because it's so good.
Oh yeah. And then like the feel was definitely also inspired by some of those like roguelites as well, where you just kind of, you try and you're going to fail the first couple times, but each time you get a little bit better from it. So I think that's such a really cool gaming experience that I played in video games that I didn't feel had really been shown in board games of like, all right, I know I'm going to fail doing this, but if I fail in the right way and I learn the right things, this next round might be the one I get it. So I thought it was a really fun challenge to try to get into a board game because there's a couple great video games that I've become a little bit addicted to that have that element, and I'd not seen it replicated in cardboard yet. It was really exciting to do that.
Yeah, I think it's hard to do that. And I feel like it's hard to do that and make people like engage with that, because I feel like usually when we fail in games, there's a lot of potential for people to disengage and for people to be like, oh, I failed, so I suck. And like, or like be like, oh, I failed, so like this game is broken, or whatever those feelings are. So when you build a game that makes people like lose, but then be like, oh, like I gotta try right now again. That's like, I feel like the peak. That's as good as you can get. Once you've done that in design, it's like anything else is like the cherry on top, because that's so hard to do. And a lot of my favorite games actually tend to be the games that do that. The games that make me want to challenge myself and be like, oh, but if I just like can figure this one part out, then I'm good. That puzzler, I think in all of us that love games, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's always a puzzle element. That's so awesome. I love Edge of Tomorrow too. What was the original title of that? They were going to call it something else. They were going to call it like Restart or something ridiculous.
Yeah. I think it had Kill in it too, because it was based off a manga, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, it was supposed to be like Kill Again or something like that. Or it had to do with the thing they do before they like reset or something like that. And I remember I was reading about it and I was like, wow, that would have been like not as good if they had named it that. Could have ruined the movie maybe. But yeah, such a good movie. Such a good premise as well. So is it like when I lose in Warp's Edge, is that kind of what's happening? Am I like going back to the start of the battle?
Yeah, so you have these warps that like after you go so far and basically your bag runs out, you get to restart again and try again as you go back through. So you're having these, and then like the enemies get somewhat reset. They'll get reset, but it's not the exact order each time. But
so every time can still be a little bit different.
Yeah, but it also means you get to what's coming up too. So you come back with the knowledge of what enemies are in that deck. As they slowly get revealed, and the first round they're going to just shoot you down, but at the end of whenever you get to reset your bag, you have a handful. You have more cool tokens that you're putting in your bag. You know what's in there. You get a special skill because you learned something cool, and you get to take all those cool things that you earned. So it doesn't feel like you're failing. It feels like you're earning things.
That reminds me a little bit of have you played Time Stories? Have you played any of those? Yeah. Reminds me a little bit of Time Stories. Every time you like fail in that game, you're like, well, at least I have the knowledge of like sort of what's coming up. And like I saw this side. My favorite thing is when you do Time Stories and like you do something and you're like, well, I know this side. So you're like, okay, next time I'm going to go look over there, because like we didn't even go over there yet. So like, what is that? And there's always like new things bringing you back, but old things where you're like, well, I know where I messed up here, so let's not do that this time.
Oh yeah.
Learn from your own time travel mistakes. That's super awesome. And I love that. So is it when you finish the game then, and then you go back to the very beginning, is that game going to have like a totally different setup than the last time you played? And is it more like you have save points? So it's like, if I die here, it's like, I'm going to go back to the third wave or whatever.
Yeah, so each game's like a standalone, like you're facing against this mothership. If you get you get a certain number of warps that you get to try again to defeat that mothership, and each time all the enemies get reset to try it again. And it also has a cool mechanic that the enemies that you're facing, so you get a lot of like small starfighters that you have to shoot down on your way there, that you get different rewards based on whether you try to evade them or try to blow them up. So you actually even get to customize by your bag further by how you even defeat enemies as you go. So you have just a slew of choices as you're trying to figure out like the right one. And and you can see the mothership in the distance like the whole time. So you can see what their strengths are. And each one has a better ways to kill it than others. So sometimes it's not as obvious. So you're kind of always trying to puzzle out like, what's the best way if I have this like whole horde of enemies ahead of me? How can I get through them, rather by blowing them up or evading them, to get the right tokens to finally get this mothership at the end?
So it's like every time you play, it's going to be like, there might be like different things that are like weaknesses or strengths when you're going up against your enemies. That's really awesome. That also sounds like it has lots of replayability, which is great, because I feel like that's the other hard thing to do with solo games, is like once you've played it, it's like, like Time Stories. Like Time Stories, I love that game, but the only problem with it is like once you buy the game and you play it, like you need to like wipe your mind. You need like one of those Men in Black like blinky lights to be like, I'll play it again with you. I actually just told a friend I'd play it, and I was like, I mean, I've played some of them, so if I play with you, it's going to be weird. But I was like, I'm just going to try to forget. I'm just going to, let's give ourselves some space, and hopefully my old mind will start to forget things, and it'll be great. Yeah. But that's awesome. That also reminds me of the warp drive. I don't know if they call it a warp drive, but in Star Trek Discovery, they have like this cool mycelial like mushroom thing that they do where they can like travel through time. Reminds me a little. Cool. But it's like sometimes only have so many, because like once they use this stuff, it gets used up, and it's weird. Anyways, I don't know if you're watching Star Trek Discovery, but it's weird and it's interesting. That's cool. And when it comes to games that you have designed, is there a specific place you go to for inspiration, or do you go to like, it sounds like you go to various different places. Like it sounds like you like sci-fi, and you like fantasy, and you like dinosaurs, and you like so many things. But is there any place that you ever find like you always kind of come back to?
I mean, I do have a soft spot for science fiction. It could just be my engineering background and working in like the innovation space too, like technology and how that can relate to everything is always a piece of fascination for me. Recently, I've been really interested in games that tie to some kind of historical premise, because maybe just an excuse to read up about it and express it there. So that's been pretty fun.
Is there like a period of history you'd love to do a game on, or like an event?
Yeah, the one that fascinates me right now is trying to do one on the Whiskey Rebellion because it was a Pittsburgh local history thing. And it had just a lot of very interesting elements to it, where like newly formed nation was one of the first tests of federal power, and just has a lot of really interesting dynamics, and a lot of like the founding fathers kind of had their own opinions on what it was. So it was, I feel like it's also just not a very well known about event. So
like,
I have no game idea for it, but I want to.
But yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I love it. I personally am like I love history, and I love learning new things about history. And I love when games like, we also have, I don't know if I'm going to say this right. But we have the game that is about the election of 1812, and sort of like the smear campaign that was involved in that at Renegade. And I personally like loved that game. And I remember when I was demoing this game, and like, I don't know if no one had just heard of this. It's also by, I forget the name of the designer, but it's by a very good, well-established designer who designed it with a high school principal, I think, or a teacher. And yeah, so it's really cool. And then it teaches you a lot about history. And I didn't know about this smear campaign. I mean, obviously I'm also in Canada, But I did take American history when I was in high school because that's a thing that we do, I guess, that you can do if you would like. It's an extra credit, but yeah. But yeah, it was really cool to like learn about that. And I also love when you kind of like get the sense of playing through history and kind of like understanding the decisions and why people did things. Because it's like a really cool interactive way to learn about something and then feel like you were also part of it at the same time when you game it, whether that be video games or board games. Super cool.
Yeah, I know recently I was designing my game Boomerang Europe, and it has like a map of Europe, and I was just doing some research for what like places I wanted to feature in there. And as I was like trying to look up like good historical spots that I wanted to feature in the game, I was shocked by how many ones I recognized by seeing them in board games. I was like, I feel like my geography is like has nothing to do with like what I learned in high school, and it's all about all the games,
all the maps and games that have taught us stuff. Yeah, no, like how many things. It's so funny because I also just feel like even something like Pandemic teaches you like weird things about where things are. We're like, oh, I didn't know that these things were so like near each other. That's interesting. Yeah. That makes sense when I learned about that thing where these people had conflicts. They're right beside each other. I get it. Also, you love maps, don't you? Isn't that another love of yours? Yeah.
Yeah, I really.
Is there any games that you'd love to do where like you could have like a super, or didn't you have something a little while ago that was super cool with like maps?
Yeah,
like
I did Almanac, the Dragon Road, where each page had a unique map of a different city that you could go through. So it has like a big overland map, and it feels, I'm going to use the word legacy, but that's not quite right. But basically, you get this cool map, and you get to discover a couple different cities each game.
Yeah.
And it has a big storybook that you flip through. There's unique rules for each map that you go to as you explore the city. Yeah. And that was a super fun one. And Jackie Davis did the art for that, and she's amazing. And had such a cool storybook feel to it as well.
Yeah, I love all of that. I also love the idea of, kind of feeling like you're like an old school, like world explorer cartographer back when we had people that like made maps and they weren't just like, this is a map of a place we know. They're like, I don't even know what this place is. I'm here to draw the map. Let's figure this out. Where are these things? Yeah, super cool. And when it comes to playing games, or like, did you start? So you started in this in sort of getting into the modern games. So I think you were saying earlier your in was like Munchkin, and then from there it just kind of expanded.
It went like D&D to Munchkin to Settlers to Ticket to Ride, and then then you get those moments where you're like, well, I had 5 games last year, but now I have like 50 games, and how did this happen?
Yeah, you're like, what happened to me? That was the same for me. I think Munchkin was my first sort of in-game, and I remember talking to gamers about it later, and there's also this like weird shame with Munchkin. I don't know if you've experienced this, where you'll be like, yeah, like I love Munchkin, and then other people are like, oh, like Munchkin, interesting. I feel like there's judgment sometimes around like loving Munchkin, but it was also my first game love, and I'm very proud of it because it gatewayed me into some pretty cool things. Mm-hmm. And actually, I went from like Munchkin, I think, to D&D, and then out from there. So it's pretty cool. So when it comes to games that you like to play and sort of like other designs that you admire, like something that you've played that you're like, oh, like I wish I had designed this, or like, oh, like I love this and I could like maybe use this idea at some point, like kind of retool it or rework it myself. Is there anything that like comes to your mind as to things that like just bring you joy at the table?
Yeah, there's a couple games I feel like have a common element that I just love playing, where like a Robo Rally or Galaxy Trucker, where they have the moments where like no matter like you try to plan really well and things just go horribly wrong, and you're trying to like control the chaos. And I think that's such a fun, surprising element to the game, where just almost just like all hell breaks loose, and you're just like, I'm just trying to salvage what I can. So in those games, I find those ones very fun. Someone who I just always look like, another designer who I'm always looking at their game, is like Friedman Freese. His Power Grid is one of my favorite games of all time, and I really admire how he does games in just all kinds of different genres, everywhere from like lighter family games to like economic games like Power Grid. Has done several really cool solo games like like Friday and what was the other one that he just came out with? It's Finished. That was super great too.
Okay.
Um, like I love like his breadth of designs. Like he has done so many different things. So I always admired that and always pay attention when he has something new coming out.
That's cool. I've played Power Grid, but I feel like that's the only one of the ones that you've just named. So I'm gonna have to now go look into that and all the other designs. Power Grid, I remember when I first played it, like just blew my mind. Like I was like, what is this is what Monopoly should be. This is what as I played it, I was like, this is what I want this type of game to be. But yeah, so good. Yeah, that's really awesome. And the other thing I was going to say is that sense of sort of, I guess, programming and this idea of trying to build stuff and then everything just goes completely wrong. I just had like an experience with some people who had never played like a programming game or like had a concept of the idea of strategy with chaos as like two things that come together beautifully. And I just introduced them to Colt Express, which we played through. And it was so fun. Yeah, it's so fun when you play games with people who have never played something like that and watching their first experience of like, oh, I know what I'll do. And you try to explain to people, by the way, you're going to make plans and it's not going to go well. So just know if they fall apart, that's normal and don't be frustrated. But watching people be like, I know what I'll do. And then get to a point where they're like, but then I chose to do, that was the wrong move because I didn't know you were going to do that. And just watch their brains explode when everything goes wrong. And they have so much fun though. They're like, I need to like figure out how to fix this. I love that. I love, I think that's another thing too with cooperative games, the idea of just putting out fires. You make plans and then you just really put out fires.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing those thoughts with me. It's been so great chatting with you. We're going to throw it now to the chat and see if there are some questions for us. Also, if y'all have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat now and Scott and I will get to those.
All right. Yes, we have actually quite a few questions today.
Okay, amazing.
So, we'll try to get to them quickly. I know we're almost at the top of the hour already. But so let's see. No, it's been great conversation.
Yeah.
So let's see. With restrictions, it can add new design challenges. Is there anything you would do different for upcoming pirate game if you were not restrained by Tiny Epic box size?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good question. Not sure if I would do anything different because whenever I design it, like it's the challenge of getting things into that box is like one of the first things whenever I go into it. Like, how am I going to start to
Did it all?
Yeah, like especially with a Tiny Epic game, like we normally have a theme in mind. That's something like I talked to Game ahead of time, being like, what theme do you think we should do next? And like I normally have a good idea for what I want to do, but we work it out before I even start really dig into the design. And it's like the challenge for those designs, how am I going to get like the feeling of that whole genre into the small box? So much of the design process is about getting it small, and in many ways it helps me cut things because just I'm automatically limited on like I'm not going to have a giant fold out board, so it's not even something I consider. So but yeah, that's a good question. Like if I didn't have that constraint, like what would that pirate game look like? It'd probably I like modular boards so much, I don't know if I'd have a giant fixed board. So
maybe a giant modular board.
Yeah. So yeah, for not having that constraint, it's a good question. I think it would be such a different design approach from the very beginning, from the initial sheet of paper I have. It would probably bear no resemblance to what came out.
So a totally different pirate game is what we would get.
Be completely, utterly different pirate game.
All right. Well, there you go. If you like the Tiny Epic Pirates and you want more of that, then you can enjoy it and then be like, hey, Scott, now design the big version of whatever that is. Something totally different, please.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we have a little bit of a hint with my game Heroes, a Lander, and see what happens if we did Tiny Epic Kingdoms.
Yes.
And I had literally no box size constraint because that thing is giant.
Huge, yeah.
So
awesome. Well, we did have a question about land, air, and sea. So what was one of the biggest challenges when designing that one?
Ooh, the number of player powers that was extraordinarily large, more so than any of the tiny epics by far. And if you want to talk about crazy Excel sheets, the way those powers were listed up and having to compare and having a good playtesting regimen to make sure that they all interacted well with one another, that if there was any conflicts, it was easier for the players to contend with, because the game itself, we really tried to make very streamlined and simple. And a lot of the flavor comes by those unique faction abilities. So making sure that they felt unique but still made perfect sense when playing against other players, and were obvious for how these very powerful and unique abilities could be resolved. That was definitely a challenge. We left, I think, plenty on the cutting room floor, just because, as cool as they were, they conflicted with rules, how they would only set to confuse. Even though if like I was there to sit at the table and explain it to you, you would be like, that's super cool. But budget will not allow me to fly with every copy sold. So that is one constraint, I guess.
Awesome. Let's see. What info do you track when you play test to be able to use in a spreadsheet to make decisions?
Oh, yeah. Good question.
Player count, playtime are like the ones you definitely have to have. Rules questions is great. If the game lends itself to being able to track turn time in any way, and sometimes that's something I'll actually do afterwards. If I see like this game took us 30 minutes to play, I might afterwards kind of pace out, like we each took 10 turns and divide that by player, just to, because I want to make sure there's not a lot of downtime in the game for some of them, or less of a concern if there's other ways for people to stay engaged on people's turn. But everyone's at the table with their cell phone and things like that, so it's easy if you're not paying attention, or it's easy to get bored and get distracted. So that's something I'm always really sensitive to, and something I always try to make in my games, that it's turns are very quick, or there's a way to stay involved, or you want to really pay attention on other people's turns. Final scores, if there's a scoring mechanism, definitely want to see that. That's something I'm always really wanting to compare, to make sure that like scores aren't being like 11 to 90 are like the final scores. Like, I kind of like to see the winning score versus like the last place score be no more than like 30% different than the over one, because otherwise something's, I don't know, the last place player is going to really feel crappy, like they didn't even play the game right. So I want everyone to come out feeling like they had a chance and had a good time. Other things I track. If the game is small enough, I might track how many times certain cards get used, or whether any powers are used. Most importantly, if powers are never used or special actions are never used. Because there's almost always like, I'll allow like, oh, you can do this cool thing if you spend these resources, and then no one ever wants to do it, so I just take it out of the game, which is nice because it's one less rule. So those are some of the things I'll track.
Awesome. If you could go, let's save that for last. When playtesting, do you rely more on players' reactions, or what do you look at most? I know you talked about what you record, but I guess what's something you look at most?
Yeah. So I love listening to player reactions, and whenever I want to hear their reactions, I like to focus on what they maybe disliked, or what they felt was missing, as a, like if they have a negative feedback on something, as opposed to what their like proposed solution is. Because I really, and it's a little bit of like the engineering background, that I want to get into like the problem before I even consider how I might address it. Like I don't want to. I would prefer if a player gives feedback that's not just like, I wish I got 3 extra cards this turn to do that. And be like, well, no, why did you want 3 extra cards?
Yeah.
What, like, were you missing? Were you missing resources? Did you not feel like you were able to do an action? Like, I want to talk about that before we get into how we might solve it. So for player reactions, that's always something I try to really get into, like the problem they're experiencing or like the feeling that they're having. Because it's pretty natural for anyone testing something or something feels wrong to try to offer a solution right off the bat. And I always want to take a step back from that when I play test to try to figure out what's really wrong, because others might feel it or they might have felt it. And like if we go solution first, they might not have really been able to express what was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And what is your favorite sci-fi movie?
Ooh, that's a good question.
That is a really good question. Sci-fi could also be, because I am tempted to say I'm such a fan of the original Star Wars stuff, but Jurassic Park is also a favorite movie, and you can't technically make dinosaurs yet.
Yeah,
Despite,
I would say that's sci-fi.
Yeah, despite how many pennies I throw in those fountains, we're still not able to do it. So I'm gonna probably have to go Jurassic Park.
Awesome. Also one of my favorites. Let's see. Do you like abstract games at all? You seem to really love themes, so do you like any abstract games that you can think of?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I really do like abstract games. I mean, I would consider like Azul to be pretty abstract, and I love that game. Same with Sagrada. Like those are 2 games that get played like constantly at my house. Same with Hanabi. Like
Yeah.
we play those all the time, and those themes could be anything. So
Yeah. It's so funny because I always feel like those are the games that I'm always like, this could be this could be this theme. Just slap something. I feel like people just pick the themes that are like, this is pretty. This will make people be like, what's this? Fireworks? I like fireworks.
yeah, and they're gorgeous games. But yeah,
They are all beautiful games, 100%. I love actually the way in Sagrada, the way you build your stained glass window from sort of like the outside, and how that's like, I didn't even know, although obviously it makes sense that that's how you would build a stained glass window. When I learned that, they were like, oh, that's because that's how you actually do it. And I was like, oh, that's how you do it. And then I thought about it after, and I was like, I mean, you don't grab a glass and then build outward this way. That doesn't make any sense.
That does make sense, yeah.
Let's see. What typically comes first in your designs, theme or mechanics?
It's been both ways, because like my dinosaur game that I was mentioning, that was definitely themed first. I wanted to do something cool about paleontology. Warp's Edge was a little bit mechanics first, with the bag building, wanting to stem from there. Yeah, so it really just depends on the design. I've had inspiration both ways.
That's cool. And speaking of bag building, what do you find bag drawing can bring to a design that are different than cards or dice? Any tips for someone wanting to make a game with bag drawing?
Yeah. There's a couple things it can do, even so like in Warp's Edge, you're doing a lot of placing of tokens like around cards and things like that, and it's a lot easier to just cleanly doing that and keep your play space better than just having a deck of cards. Just even just from like a logistics of how much room you have on your table and being able to do things like that. So you get some low level benefits like that. One other thing is that with the bag, you can't always even tell how many tokens you have in there. But if you're doing like a deck building game, you can always see how big your deck is pretty easily. With bag building, it's also a little bit easier if you wanted to include a mechanic where you only explore part of your bag, but not the whole, say, deck. So like a deck building game, you tend to cycle through the same thing. But like another bag building solo game, coffee roaster, like you only explore a portion of your bag every time, so you're not guaranteed any results. you have a pretty good chance. You can up your odds, but you're not guaranteed things. So um, they do accomplish, and I'm sure this is why the questions is asked, is they accomplish a lot of the same goals of being able to, like a bag building or deck building, like you're able to customize the deck. Really, you get to really choose what's in there, and fine tune it as you play. So the differences are pretty subtle, and it's worth asking yourself, if you're doing one other the other, is there a benefit for switching? So.
Very cool. Let's see. What is your favorite Renegade game other than Warp's Edge?
Oh, that is a good question. And I am Adam MacGyver's awesome library game. That is, I am blanking on the name of it, which is terrible.
Oh, it's a library game. Is it the one where you're like organizing your shelves in the library?
Yeah. Now
I'm blanking.
The cards with all the books on.
Is it Ex Libris? Yeah.
It's Ex Libris, yes.
Yeah.
I was like,
I played it
it's
too.
library. Is library in the name? And then I just screwed myself up.
It's almost in there.
Yeah. That
just
is
Latin.
Yeah, such a fun game. I love that game. I'm a little partial to flip ships too. Anything with Quanchai Moria art is also fantastic in my book. And I'm a sucker for dexterity games as well. So
Awesome. What is your favorite push your luck game?
Ooh.
Ink and Gold, probably.
Yes.
That's really good. And it supports up to like 8 players, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and also, have you played the original one with the really weird kind of art?
No, I have not.
There's like, after, you'll have to go and look it up. There's the original print of it. There's some pretty interesting art on it. And for me, that was always the fun part of that game. That was actually one of my favorites to play when I worked at Snakes and Lattes with the staff.
Oh, yeah.
It was like one of our favorites when we were done the day. We would like sit and play some Ink and Gold. Ooh, feels so good. Such a good game.
Awesome. So let's see. Let's end it on this really, I think it's a really good question. All of them are great questions, actually. You guys know how to ask questions. So if you could go back in time and do it all over again, I'm sensing a theme here. What would you have done differently?
I'm tempted to say not much, because I'm pretty happy with how things have turned out. If I could have I've been pretty happy with like how my game design career has unfolded. I've gotten to work with awesome people. I'd almost be afraid if I would go back and try doing it again that I'd screw it up. So this is a pretty good timeline. I'm liking this one.
I like that answer. Awesome. I think that's it though for tonight.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, those are all great questions.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for those questions. I especially found that where you were talking about sort of like what you record for game tracking to be very interesting, because I've never noticed this until you mentioned it. But the idea of your turns and keeping track of how long it takes people, that every time I've played one of your games, I feel like I've been very engaged. And I am the type of person that will easily get distracted by my phone at a table. Like if I'm playing a game and I have time in between my turn, it's like I don't have to do anything and I can plan my stuff and then go do something else. My mind immediately is like, oh, I can do something else. And I go there. So, and I've never done that. I always like, my phone is like off to the side because I'm like, I need to focus on this. So that's good. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Scott. It was really lovely talking with you. Remind us before you go who you are, what you do, and where we can find you and your work online.
Yeah. I'm Scott Almes, a freelance game designer, including the awesome Warp's Edge, now with Renegade Games. You can find me on Twitter at Scott_Almes, and also on Board Game Geek. It's a great way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody else for joining us. A quick few updates before we head out. So we do have Hadrian's Wall available for pre-order, and we also have Altered Carbon, the RPG, available for pre-order, as well as Kids on Brooms, the card game, which you can play with your Kids on Brooms RPG, or you can play it separate as a standalone 2-player game. Either way, it's amazing and it's magical. And you can pre-order all of those now online or at your friendly local game store. And we would like to remind you of our streaming schedule. So we're keeping it more phenomenal on Mondays. We have Vampire Wednesdays on Wednesday, and we're also doing a new random roll with some friends from the industry, where we'll also be chatting with them as we play games with them on Thursdays. And then we also have the Renegade Society radio show every Friday, where we're talking to new, amazing, and exciting guests like Scott here. And yes, before we head out, just one more time, I'm going to give you that code word for Warp's Edge. So the code word is Mothership. So you can enter that to try to win a copy of this amazing game. My fingers are crossed for all of you. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Scott.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you. And thank you, Desiree, for doing all of the producing magic, as always. All right, friends, we will see you in the next one. And remember to play your game.